Well, the National Security Agency's massive surveillance programs have been scrutinized during various hearings on Capitol Hill, but now it seems the program will have its day in court. It comes in the form of a motion for a retrial of a Somali immigrant who was convicted for conspiring against the U.S. 36-year-old Basali Mwalin is a cab driver from San Diego. He was granted asylum in the U.S. after trying to escape the violence in Somalia. Government agencies started looking into Mwalin as a suspect back in 2003. In 2010, he was arrested with 3 other Somali immigrants and indicted with multiple counts of conspiracy after he was caught speaking with one of the leaders of the terrorist group Al-Shabaab. And then he sent the group $8,500 to support, quote, jihad. Mwalin and the other 3 were convicted by a jury and are set to be sentenced on November 18th. But that doesn't mean it's case closed. In the light of the Edward Snowden revelations, the NSA claimed Mwalin was a prime example that mass surveillance programs work to thwart terror plots.
The Basali Mwalin case, what we knew at the time when we made that query was we knew a number that we had reasonable suspicion was affiliated with a terrorist group plotting against the homeland. That number was in Somalia. It was associated with Al-Shabaab. In order to find the needle that matched up against that number, we needed the haystack. Right? That's what the premise is in this case. And in that point, if just before somebody had made that query, you'd said this is going to connect to a number in San Diego, that would have been as surprising as if you'd said that number is connected to someplace in Yemen.
But now Mwalin and his lawyer have filed for a retrial because he argues that the extent to which he was monitored using Section 215 and Section 702 of the FISA Act violated his First and Fourth Amendment rights. He also says that keeping FISA materials out of the hands of his attorney is a violation of due process. So this case could be the first time that Americans have the chance to see what the courts think about the constitutionality of the NSA's mass surveillance programs. I was joined earlier by Marcy Wheeler. She's a reporter for EmptyWheel.net, and I asked her what is really on trial here, Mwalin's case specifically or the NSA's surveillance program.
He is the only known person who was tipped by the Section 215, which is the phone dragnet program, and he was prosecuted for sending less than $10,000 to Al-Shabaab. And since that time, we've discovered that the entire prosecution rests on this Section 215 program. His lawyers since August have been trying to say, wait a second, this program is illegal. And the judge in the case really just isn't all that interested. I know that yesterday in a hearing, it came up again, and the judge just said Smith v. Maryland, which is a 1979 case that talks about one phone record for one person, and he didn't really want to deal with the constitutional issues.
And that 1997 case obviously is quite dated, quite well before any of this NSA mass surveillance started happening that we know of. Would this have been, would this case have been really up for retrial had it not been for Edward Snowden's leaks?
No, it wouldn't. And, you know, part of me actually wonders whether he would have ever been indicted were it not for the government's need to have a success story here, because we know as of 2009 they hadn't had any. We know that they were boasting about having preliminary investigations. We know that in 2009 the FBI said this guy isn't worth indicting because the reasons he's sending money to Somalia have nothing to do with terrorism. They have to do with defending his ancestral home. And then a year later, all of a sudden, when the NSA has to keep going to Congress to get this reapproved, all of a sudden we have him indicted. And so I think he would never have known, he would never been able to raise these issues were it not for Edward Snowden. But I also think we should raise real questions about whether he would have even been indicted if it weren't for the need to show results for this program that really has none.
And that really leads into my next question, which is, was there enough evidence without this NSA surveillance to have indicted and convicted him and his 3 co-conspirators?
They would have never have come back to him. We know that they investigated him in 2003, and the FBI found no evidence of criminality. And then in 2007, they indirectly found him, they say, and this is based on executive branch testimony, they indirectly found him in conversation again, indirectly, with a al-Shabaab warlord named Adeniro. And everything that followed came off of that phone dragnet tip. We don't know what indirect means. We know that, they can go 3 hops deep, so it may have been he was 3 hops away. I know his defense claims that intercepts that the government claims is to this Somali warlord weren't to the Somali warlord. Obviously, the jury didn't agree with that, but it all follows. And one of the big questions is the government using this Section 215 as the sole basis for probable cause to get warrants of American people?
Now, if there is a retrial, obviously right now the judge is still deliberating whether or not the retrial will happen in the first place. But if there is a retrial, how likely is it that we will actually see an NSA representative appear in court and explain its surveillance tactics?
Well, it's actually interesting because the judge yesterday said that he was only going to decide on the retrial issue today at 2 o'clock California time. So we're going to know pretty quickly, and that's one of the reasons why it's pretty clear the judge isn't going to give real consideration to this retrial motion. Now, if they appeal, what's been happening at the same time is that, right after the defense submits a motion, then the government releases vast new information about the many abuses of this program that were in place when they first tipped Molin, which was 2007. So it was before the worst of the abuses the government claims were cleaned up. And so even over the course of this 2-3 month period, there's been a vast amount of new information released, and we know that the government is considering releasing another possibly very central FISA court opinion from 2006 on the same day that Molin would be sentenced if he doesn't get a new trial. So I think, I don't think anyone from NSA is going to show up. They would do it by declaration. But I think that there is growing evidence that the program itself was fundamentally flawed from the start, even according to, for example, former Assistant Attorney General David Criss, who had said, well, maybe the first opinion was erroneous. That's the one that authorized the phone collection on Molin. So I think that there's a lot of evidence it was problematic from the start, and that evidence is coming out. So I think if there were an appeal or something, we might be able to see that evidence in one place.
And Marcy, there are just so many question marks when it comes to this case in specific, but also the wider ideas of NSA mass surveillance. The one thing that we do know, though, is that this case in this potential retrial, could potentially set a precedent for the future. Marcy Wheeler, a reporter for EmptyWheel.net, thank you so much for weighing in.
Thanks for having me.